talk a little bit about breathing today, because I know that when your teacher says, use your diaphragm, you're like, what the heck does that mean? What am I supposed to flex? How's that supposed to feel? Let's talk a little bit about it. I want you to think about the respiratory system involving your lungs as the power source or the actuator of the vocal instrument. Your lungs are like the storage depot for air. That's not, of course, their primary function, which is to perpetually oxygenate the blood and cleanse it of carbon dioxide so that we can maintain life, right? All right, so let's talk about the thorax first. Don't be intimidated. You're like, what is that? Thorax. The thorax is the rib cage. So it's the space. It houses the lungs and it houses the heart. It can be made bigger and smaller, and that results in either inhalation or exhalation. The connection of the ribs to the spine and the sternum is very flexible, and that allows for a great range of motion. When you contract the respiratory muscles, the entire thorax can be raised. Okay, we're moving on to the lungs. So the lungs, which are housed in the thorax, are organs. They're not muscles, which means they can't move of their own accord, but they still have to be expanded and made smaller in order for us to breathe. And one of the ways that that's done is that the lungs are coupled to the interior wall of the thorax by way of the pleural sac, is what it's often referred to as. And you think, what the heck's the pleural sac? Well, imagine this. You spray a window and then you take a plastic bag. So you've got water all over the window and you put the plastic bag on the window and you could probably still move it around. The stuff that's in the middle, the water, that's the pleural sac. So whatever dimension the thorax moves to, the lungs are going to move to that dimension as well, because they're hooked up by way of this pleural sac. And if you didn't have that viscous membrane or that water permeable membrane, you would have friction and it would be painful. And believe me, when people have trouble with the pleural sac, they feel pain. That's what pleurisy is called. And I've had pleurisy, where you actually get a rip or a tear in the pleural sac, and it hurts to expand and depress your lungs. So the lungs are attached to the thoracic wall by way of this pleural sac, and it helps you to expand and depress the lungs. And they'll go wherever the thoracic cavity goes. Wherever your rib cage goes, your lungs will follow, and that's what helps you, but also with the diaphragm, to pull air into your body. Okay, now let's move on to inspiratory muscles. The most important inspiratory muscle that we have is the diaphragm. So here's how the diaphragm works. It separates your thorax from your organs underneath your rib cage, right? So it rests like this, and as soon as you activate it, it depresses like that and ends up pulling air inside your body. It creates a much bigger cavity so that you can bring air in. It's like, think about pulling the plunger out of a syringe. When you suck something into the syringe, you kind of hold it, but then you pull, like when you're having blood drawn or something. That's exactly how the diaphragm works. It depresses and creates this suction, a pulling in of the air. You know that the diaphragm actually sits much higher than people usually talk about, or your teachers may even know. It's not a super low feeling. You may feel a displacement of the organs and the pressure descend low into your pelvic region, but the sternum actually attaches to the diaphragm actually attaches to your sternum. So it's a very high place. Something that might surprise you about the diaphragm and might make you go, what? Is that the diaphragm is passive during exhalation. Biologically, the diaphragm is exclusively a muscle of inspiration. In the vast majority of people, it's entirely passive during exhalation. Its normal action is to contract during inhalation and then relax during exhalation. The diaphragm, as important as it is in inhalation, is not the only important inspiratory muscle. We have what are called external intercostals. They originate from the rib above and it inserts into the rib below. So you have this kind of connection in between each individual rib. And those muscles will contract and lift the rib cage, kind of in a swinging motion. And you get this widening and expanding of the thoracic space. So the external intercostals run obliquely toward the midline of your body. So they're not transversely situated like this. It's oblique. So if you take your right hand and put it on the right side of your body, you'll get about the right placement of the external intercostal. Okay, let's talk about the muscles of exhalation. There are quite a few of them, much more than are needed for inhalation. So underneath the external intercostals are the internal intercostals, and they are underneath the external intercostals. So the internal intercostals are responsible and for assisting the rib cage as it comes back down. So the other ones were oblique toward the midline of the body. These ones are oblique, I gotta cross my hands now, toward the away from the midline of your body. So they're going to be this way instead of this way, that way. The strong initial contraction of the internal intercostals will overpressurize the breath, leading to a strident and pressed sound. So if you breathe all your air out and then you try and get the last little vestiges of it, like say you're singing a really long phrase, you're talking a really long time and I haven't taken a breath yet, so I get right to the end and then you start to feel the squeeze in the bottom half of your rib cage. I am squeezing my internal intercostals. Something we try to avoid until the very last minute because we don't want that press. Did you hear that press that came into my sound? That's what we don't want. So we do not, we avoid the strong contraction of those muscles unless we absolutely need it. For singers, the more important muscles of expiration are found in the abdomen. And there are 5 pairs of these. You're going to have your rectus abdominis, which is your 6-pack or your 12-pack or your 0-pack. You're going to have your transverse abdominis that runs transversely like this. And then you're going to have your obliques. You're going to have your external obliques and your internal obliques. And then you have your quadratus lumborum, and that's in the back. And this all helps to stabilize the rib cage. As you twist and turn and bend and lift and all of that, it's going to help support your entire rib cage so that it stays together as it moves flexibly. These muscles are extremely important in maintaining your core, and they are all considered a core. So when they say activate your core or strengthen your core, it's the entire around that we're looking at. Muscles assist in expiration by either deflating the thorax or depressing the thorax, or by compressing the abdomen and thrusting it upward against the underside of the diaphragm, and that helps to deflate the lungs. I'll leave for another time to go into the mechanics of controlling your breath as you exhale, but I just want to say that most people forget about keeping the expansion of the ribs alive, almost fighting the collapse. So you get the external intercostals, which are responsible for inhalation. They are contracted, and then as soon as you turn around and start to exhale, you shut them off. And you cannot, that antagonism between the internal and the external intercostals and the external internal obliques, the rectus abdominis, the transverse abdominis, that fight where one is depressing and one is trying to lift still has to be had. You have to fight against that deflation. Otherwise, you won't be able to control your pressure. It'll just become too pressed. When you're singing, you have to control that. You have to keep it very bouncy, very open, very suspended. So you have a young singer who's very breathy. A lot of young women, it's very normal, by the way. Don't be impatient with them and don't let them get impatient with themselves because it's very normal. I want you to address their breath first, because chances are they are not maintaining the suspension. They're not fighting or resisting the collapse. This is why we go behind students and put our hands on their rib cage and tell them to breathe into our hands and then fight us while we apply pressure. We want them to resist it. We want them to push back out so that we can get them to turn those external intercostals back on and resist as the rib cage is depressed, which it must be in order for the breath to be exhaled. But we have to be in control of that. And the only way to do that is by keeping those external intercostals as a part of the whole equation. So try that on your young students. Try and get them to fight that collapse. And I think it's almost like they're drowning. It feels like you're drowning. When I'm singing right, it does feel like I'm drowning, and I get out of breath like I'm drowning. So give that a shot.